Today's video is going to be about graphing and writing compound inequalities. So a compound inequality is like a compound word. It's just two inequalities put together. Like a compound word would be fire truck or campfire. But a compound inequality is just two inequalities that are graphed on the same graph. For you this year, the inequalities will always graph towards each other. So keep that in mind when you're graphing them and writing them. So let's look at our first examples here. We have two separate ones. They are written as two individual inequalities, but we are going to graph them on the same number line. When you put your numbers on your graph, make sure they line up in relation to 0. So if we're looking here, we have -6 and we have +9. So -6 is going to be to the left of 0 and 9 is going to be to the right. So your numbers should line up like they are on a number line. Now we're going to look at this. The first thing we look at is my circle going to be open or closed? They're going to graph just like any other inequality. There's no line underneath, so the circle will be open on both of them. And then C is greater than because it's opening up to the C, which means all the numbers greater than -6 go to the right. This one, C is the smaller of the two because it's pointing at the C. And so all the numbers less than 9 go to the left. So you can see they're going to graph towards each other. So let's try that again. Here we have the 0. Line them up like they're on a number line. Here's my -3. Here's my 5. This circle is going to be closed because it has the line underneath. This one's going to be open. F is greater than because it's opening to the F. So all the numbers greater than -3 are to the right, and it's pointing at the F. So all the numbers that are smaller than 5 are going to be to the right. So you can see both of these graphs, they are pointing toward each other. So now let's look at some that are written as one inequality. We just put them together. They're done the same way. So here's your 0 on the number line. Here's your -3. Here's your 6. This one is going to be solid. This one is going to be open. F is bigger because it's opening to the F. So all the numbers bigger are going to go to the right. And this is pointing at the F. So all the numbers smaller. So again, they just graph toward each other. Let's try that again. Here's our 0. Here's our -5. Here's our 2. Both of my circles are going to be solid. M is bigger, so all the numbers larger, but M is also smaller, so all the numbers less than 2. So again, they point at each other. So now let's just write some from a graph. So you can look here that I've got -4 and 7. So when I write my inequality, I'm just going to put -4 and 7, and I'm going to give myself a variable. I don't care what the variable is. Let's just call it M. And when I look at this, I'm sorry, there are no lines on here. I'm just going to draw lines. All of the numbers greater than 4 are included in this half. So that means M is bigger than 4. So it opens up to that M. Here, on the other hand, all the numbers are going to be smaller. So M is going to be smaller. It's going to have the line underneath because this is a solid circle. So you can see it looks just like the ones up here, but we've just written it ourselves. So here I'm going to do this one. Again, I'm sorry, there are no lines on here. I'll put them. So I know I'm just going to line my numbers up like they're on the number line. I'm going to pick a variable. I don't care what your variable is. I know this one is open, so there's not going to be any line, but my variable C is larger than all of my, than any number. Sorry, let me say that again. My variable is larger than -5, but here my variable is smaller than -1, so it's going to point at that. This is solid, so I have the line. Let's do some from a word problem. So I'm going to read the word problem. You're moving into an apartment and need to use the elevator to get your belongings to the 4th floor. The elevator capacity sign says the weight capacity of this elevator is greater than 100 pounds and not greater than 800. So write a compound inequality that expresses the limits for the elevator. So I'm reading the word problem to find my two numbers that I'm going to work with, and they are 100 and 800. So I'm going to line them up like they're on a number line, and I'm going to give myself a variable. So I'm going to use C for capacity. And it says the elevator is greater than 100 pounds. So if it's greater than 100, can it be 100? It cannot. It has to be greater than 100. So that means my capacity is greater than 100, and there's not going to be a line underneath it because it has to be greater than. But then it says not greater than 800. That means my C has to be less than. But if it's not greater than 100, can it be 100 or 800, excuse me? Yes, it can. It can't be greater than 800, but it can be 800. Let's look at another one here. So again, just reading it to find those numbers that I'm working with. Mrs. Anderson is crazy about cats, but her husband knows that there are limits on how many cats can be in one household before it is labeled the crazy cat house. There can be no more than 5, but less than 16. So the two numbers I'm working with are 5 and 16. And we're just going to use C for cats. You can use any variable that you want. So let's look at this. It can be more than 5, but can it be 5? It can. It can be more than that, but it can also be that. So then I'm going to make that C is going to be greater, but it has to be less than 16. So if it's less than 16, can it be 16? No, it cannot. It is less than 16. I do not have 16 cats. I don't even have 5 anymore. I'm down to 3. So here we go. In order to keep your savings account open, you must maintain a minimum balance of 25. However, you cannot have more than 1,200. So they're the two that I'm working with. So I can have 25 and 1,200 are my numbers. I'm going to use B for balance. You must maintain a minimum balance. So 25 is the smallest number you can have. So your balance has to be bigger than that. But can you have 25? Yes, because it's a minimum. However, you cannot have more than 1,200. So your B has to be less than 1,200, but can it be 1,200? Yes, you just cannot have more than 1,200. So I'm going to put the line underneath. And I'm sorry, I forgot to graph these. If the question says graph them, you also have to graph them. So again, lining them up like I'm on a number line. Here's my 0. Solid, solid, point toward each other. So I didn't graph these either. Let's just go back up here and graph these. So do this. I know it just says write them, but sometimes on the test I'm going to ask you to graph them. So in relation to 0, right? The 5 is solid, the 16 is open, and they graph toward each other. So let's go back and do this last one. Number line. Here's 100. Here's 800. Here's my 0. 100 is open. 800 is solid, and they graph toward each other.